Hello, it's Lynn Watts here with Wyatt the Wonder Dog Books, and today I'm going to talk about anger. I would imagine that as an elementary school counselor, you get referred a lot of students who are angry. Maybe they get in disagreements, maybe they get in arguments, maybe they actually get in actual physical fights with other students. And it's considered sort of your job to figure out what to do and how to get them to figure out other ways to handle their anger than the ways that they are presently. I know that in my early days, I was actually doing my internship. This is kind of a funny story. I, of course, was working in a very high risk school and got referred quite a number of students who got into fights. This is elementary school, keep in mind, and had a lot of trouble controlling their anger. So, um, being very eager to get going with this, I created an anger management or anger control group. And I quickly got, I don't even remember, maybe four, five, six at the most. It wasn't very many students, all boys, as I recall, who were referred to me from their teachers as needing anger management. So I'll never forget, I had my very first group meeting and talked about anger and controlling ourselves and who knows what all. I don't even remember the first lesson. But then once the group was over, I was walking the students back to class, and two of the boys got in a argument and pretty much a push shove kind of fight on the way back to class. Well, that was a little discouraging, you know. There are times when, as a counselor, your interventions obviously are not working, or at least they're not working, we could say, yet. All right, use a growth mindset. So I think anger is certainly something that probably you deal with. And the question is, well, what do you do about it? I think that oftentimes we're very quick to teach students strategies for managing anger. And by that, I mean everything from self-talk to breathing strategies to, take a break, talk it out, conflict resolution types of things. But we don't yet, or we don't prior to that, lay a foundation with students for anger and what anger is. So I'm going to put a link, first of all, to a good video on how the brain works when there is anger. You may be familiar with this type of thinking, but this idea of the primitive brain and how it responds quickly with fight, flight, or freeze. And certainly part of that can be anger. And this is, of course, our early reptilian brain, as they call it. And so this not only describes how the brain reacts quickly to it without really much thinking or executive thinking from the prefrontal cortex, but actually responds to anger or to a particular situation based on our perception of what is going on in that particular situation. So anger might be part of it. Of course, there are other emotions that could be part of that as well. But I think we need to, first of all, recognize that anger is not always a negative thing. I think perhaps we jump to the conclusion that we need to teach students first to calm down and to get rid of the anger and this sort of thing before we first identify what the anger is trying to tell us. Where is that anger coming from? And for many students, depending on the environment that you work in, anger is a protective device. In other words, if they live in an environment where there are a lot of threats on their well-being, whether it's physical or emotional or any type of threat, whether that's perceived, whether that's really a threat, or whether that's simply their perception because of the environment they live in, then anger provides somewhat of a protective mechanism for a student. And if that is the case, then teaching them some breathing strategies is probably going to be way down the line before you first take a look at the cause of the anger and what the purpose of it is. So I think that the first step, first of all, is teaching students in their own body where anger comes from. And then secondly, I think that we have to teach them some critical skills in terms of identifying the purpose of the anger. Sometimes anger is a sign that we do need to stand up for ourselves. That might be the kind of situation where anger is actually kind of a not only a protective, but a productive emotion. There are other times that the perceived threat or the threat is not really significant. And so a student may be overreacting based on prior experiences. So again, helping students to think critically about that and think through their situation is important. So this, of course, is where perhaps some breathing strategies can come in terms of becoming calm enough that a student takes a breath at least and gives themselves a chance to think through the situation and what the anger is telling them. And then finally, we don't want to teach students simply to ignore anger. It may be that it is, as I said, protective and a very significant and important emotion that they need to pay attention to. So that all being the case, I think we can instead teach students to ask themselves some particular questions. And let me just share a few questions that I think can be useful with a student. One is, what is this anger trying to tell me? The second question might be something to do with choices. What are the choices that I have here? And certainly one choice could be to get in a fight or to say something that is going to create more tension, more anger on the other side. So what are my choices? And then what are the consequences of that? Now, I get that in the moment of being very angry, it's somewhat hard to think through these kind of critical questions. But this is why you want to teach all of these techniques during a time when a student is not already incited in being angry, but rather is calm and can begin to learn a strategy. So you can learn something like stop, which might mean to take a deep breath. Then it might mean think. All right. And then it might have something to do with determining the choices and taking action. And sometimes action, of course, is doing nothing. All right. Or walking away or asking for help. I mean, I think, as counselors, we know that there are many different choices, but students don't always know that. And sometimes they get in a cycle of always responding in the same way. So I think the important thing to recognize about anger is that it is telling us something, that it can actually be a protective type of emotion, and that we need to certainly educate students about anger in many, many different ways. Not just to take a deep breath and, practice some breathing skills, which can be very helpful. I'm certainly not downplaying those. I taught those a lot, but also to think through their choices and the consequences of those choices based on what that particular situation is. So I hope you find this helpful, and I'm going to put some links in the notes below where you can find some more ideas about how we can teach students an effective use of the emotion anger. Thanks for all that you do to help students, and thanks for listening.